Meeting of Audits and Government Efficiency. If we could call the roll.
Okay, item number one. Item number one is a motion from Council Members Garcetti and Parks relative to the creation of a commission that will focus on examining ways the city will collect revenue.
I think the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do item 2, 6, and 7 first as a group, and then do item 1 after that.
Okay. Item number 2 is a discussion on the status of efforts initiated to improve the city's billing and collection processes and other potential revenue enhancements. Item number 6 is an Office of Finance report relative to the billing and collections operations of the Los Angeles Fire Department, while item number 7 is an Office of Finance report relative to the billing and collections operation of the Los Angeles Police Department's commission investigation.
And I think we want representatives from the CAO, Finance, Fire Department, Police Department, and CLA to come to the table and update us. But why don't we start with the CAO and Finance Departments on where we are on all our collection efforts and where we are in the process.
I'm Pam Mooney from the Office of Finance. I'm the Assistant Director, and I have our Revenue Manager, Jeff Whitmore, here with us. So I can give you kind of a 2 to 3 minute synopsis of what's been done. Certainly we can go into as much detail as you want, but really the Office of Finance was created in the year 2000 with several charter responsibilities directly related to revenue collection. And so as a new department, we have taken some measures, and I'm not sure if the reason it was created was because there was some deficiency in the city collection processes, but there have been several studies and a lot of activity, and as the motion in item number 1 recognizes, we have made improvements, but there is a long way to go. So some of the things that have occurred on the city is that our office chairs a revenue management committee meeting that meets monthly that includes all the revenue collection departments. And so we try to talk about best practices and recognize some of the revenue collection problems that have happened in the city. Our department also does reviews of the billing and collection practices within departments, and as a result of our first review, which was the city's collection unit in the city attorney's office in 2003, that was transferred to the Office of Finance. And that was roughly 20 positions that were doing collections on a citywide basis. That was also the same year that we first used outside collection agencies. So the city previously was only had internal staff collecting on delinquent accounts. And when we issued the RFP, we now have 4 firms that are actually collecting on behalf of the city. And since those 4 firms have been here, it's been 6 years, and there's $117 million that probably the city would not have collected had we not leveraged our resources using the outside agencies. So that's a real big area that the city may want to look at, because there are probably over 300,000 accounts that are out for collection right now, and the value is probably somewhere around $300 million. So one of the things that our office is also doing is releasing an RFP this week for additional secondary collection efforts, trying to make every effort to collect on an account before the city actually writes it off. The Valley VICA, the Valley Industry Commerce Association, came forward in 2008, and they had a recommendation that the city should have this collection sheriff, meaning their issue was accountability. They wanted to have one person that could really be in charge of this. And so it was looked at by the CAO and the controller and our office, and the CLA's office as well. And they issued a joint report that really said that that the Office of Finance has a charter mandate to be the collection sheriff. And so that, that we didn't feel there was a need to create another office to do so. And that in looking at the books, that there was about $448 million that was targeted as being likely uncollectible, and that the main portion, or like 90% of that, was really focused in two areas: ambulance billing and unpaid parking citations. And so a lot of the efforts over the last year, especially in budget and finance, is to try and really address that. And so I know that the fire department has been working since the ad code was changed to allow for unpaid ambulance EMS accounts to be referred to collection agencies, but that hasn't actually occurred yet. And I know the fire department is here and they can speak to that. And then we have been talking with DOT in terms of what can we do to try and improve the unpaid parking collections, or is there anything that can be done to improve, because that's sort of a big lump of money. So in a nutshell, that's sort of where the most recent efforts have been. We have in our office put several new programs that you may be aware of, like the publication of the top debtors. The top 250 people that owe the city money are published on the website in an attempt similar to the state program to try and get them to pay. It also, we've sent that out to all the departments, so we encourage them not to do business with people that owe the city, large sums of money. Recently, the council adopted giving the finance lien authority so we can try and improve collections. The city attorney's report is due to come out very shortly so that we can
we hope Monday.
Yes, these are, that's right. These are
The lien
collection
authority
tools.
hasn't been given out yet.
It has not been given out, no. And we were given a couple of years the authority to sell uncollectible debt once it's written off. And we have conducted one sale that was of old judgments that the city had obtained. And it wasn't really successful in terms of money, but it was a process that most municipalities haven't sold their debt. So we were one of the first, and we were going a little blind in this area, but I think we are hoping to have another sale before the end of the fiscal year. But ultimately, you get pennies on the dollar. So we're hoping that the secondary collection effort that's we're awarding, which will be in the new calendar year, will actually be a better return than the sale. But the sale is still a last way that when we write it off the city's books, we still can try and receive some revenue from that.
Do we do anything that would be very logical to go after the parking citations, like sending a threatening letter or two, or making a phone call? Do we do any of the kinds of very, very basic collection things you would do after it's been determined that the person actually owes the money and it's past whatever period and due to collect it?
That's one of the things that we're trying to talk with the Department of Transportation, because there is an outside vendor that does all of the unpaid parking citations. And so they aren't being referred to the city's collection agencies at this time. So
I mean, even internally, you wouldn't need a collection agency to send out the first or second threatening letter. It could be something that would be very automated, and it should only cost $1 or $2 to do it if you did it in a very automated and pre-programmed way.
Yeah.
And you would probably bring a lot of money in if we're not doing that now.
I think Amir is here from the Department of Transportation, and I'm sure that they do send letters, but he can speak to specifics.
Thank you, Council Members. Amir Sadati, Assistant General Manager, LA DOT. Yes, Council Member, we do obviously do that through our current contract with ACS. We actually use a city attorney letterhead. We have there are different rules set up after certain dates, and everything is automated through a system now that's called ETIMS, and everything we have is programmed in that in it, so we receive any communication. Everything is scanned. Everything is electronic. We're trying to we keep track of how many notices we send, and obviously we have to have that tracked because of the penalties assessment. We assess additional penalties, and based on that. So we also recently have worked with the Franchise Tax Board. So the time that people's taxes are due in March, we also send a letter saying that, as part of their, we not necessarily put a lien on it, but we're getting people to actually pay when they're paying for their taxes for their unpaid citations. And the other measure is in state of California, the Department of Motor Vehicle puts basically a lien on your registration. You can't re-register your vehicle if you have unpaid citations. So a lot of those things are currently occurring, and we are doing a lot of those things. We've seen a good improvement in our collections. We're, I think, about 85% for the first 2 years of getting everything collected within the first 2 years of collection. And that's, as I've explained before, in budget and finance, the challenge here in the state of California is the license goes with the car and not with the driver's license. So there's a lot of challenges with the Department of Motor Vehicle, and when people do sell their cars and they transfer ownership, if those paperworks are done accurately and in a timely manner. So those are some of the challenges with the parking citation collection.
Now, one odd thing on that note, I remember years ago, if someone ran up a number of parking tickets and they ran across a law enforcement officer who spotted that in their record, they actually would go to jail until they settled that out. I don't think that's currently the case. Are there tough things that we can do when we find someone that has 10 parking tickets and we actually have them before us?
We boot after 5. So if you have 5 unpaid citations or more that have not been paid, then we actually put the, it's called the boot. It's the yellow device that locks the vehicle and you can't drive.
Right, that's for a parked car, but what if an officer pulls someone over to give them a moving violation or to give them a
violation?
warning, and they spot that they have 10 parking tickets? Is there anything right now that they can do to
No, I don't believe a police officer has access to a parking citation in...
It comes up on the MDT.
Right.
And the officer has the ability then to impound the vehicle.
Right, they can impound, Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Police Commission. They can't do anything to the individual because the citation is issued to the car, not to an individual. You can't prove who parked the car. So the registered owner of the vehicle technically is the one ultimately responsible for payment of that traffic citation. Vis-a-vis, you go to register your car, you must bring those citations current. So if a police officer finds a vehicle, as Amir said, has 5 or more parking citations outstanding in that jurisdiction, then the vehicle can be impounded until those citations are brought up and paid for, but you can't do anything to the individual.
So if the person stopped in a moving violation, they can actually impound his car on the spot?
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty good list of things that we can do to hit people. What about the 15%? How do they get by without paying for these, with all the things that we are doing?
There are some categories that I believe, I don't have them with me right now, Councilmember, but there are different buckets where, again, there is, you have no registration information, for example, or the declaration of non-ownership. You've sent it to someone, this person says, look, I didn't own the car, this is not my ticket. You got to go after the person that was, prior owner. There are cases where we actually have, DMV has the wrong address on file. There are some fleet cars, for example, or some rental cars that we have challenges trying to go after them because, again, it's very difficult on those agencies to provide to us the persons that were driving at the time and try to go after them. So there are different buckets in that 15 or so percent that make them very difficult to collect. And through the years, I think, unfortunately, those numbers have accumulated to the numbers that you're seeing. And our new approach, working with the Office of Finance, is really to come back and whether it's some debt that we're going to give to a third-party collector or not, we really want to write off those debts. Whatever we decide as a city that we can't no longer get this money, we bundle it, we sell it, or we actually need to write it off. So that's kind of, I think, the other part of what we would like to do and work with them as we move forward is really whatever we decide is really uncollectible should be written off, because unfortunately the perception out there is 200, 300 million of unpaid parking citation collection. But if you go back and do the details and really find out what buckets, what are the reasons these hasn't been collected, then you find out that these are the, some of the very, very difficult to collect, and that really the chances of collecting becomes more difficult as time goes by. And here in California, there's a 5-year statute. So after 5 years, you can't really go after those citations anyways.
Gotcha. Thank you. How much cooperation are you getting from the different departments? Does it vary? Is everybody in sync with this, or are some of them trailing behind?
I think it's a mixed bag, honestly, that there are a lot of attention now that there's a fiscal crisis, that people are looking at things. But, in 4 years ago, the mayor issued Executive Directive Number 5, which was related to billing and collection, and it mandated for departments that they need to write off their accounts annually, that they should use city attorney letterhead, et cetera. There are 7 areas, and finance was tasked with reporting back to the mayor on the progress. And so in our most recent report, we've issued like 4 report cards. We found, like, in the 7 areas, there are 2 that the city is above standard, and that's in terms of we're finally reporting, which was one of the items in the controller's audit, was that the city doesn't have its arms around what are the accounts receivable. And so in the last year, we had 100% cooperation from departments on the reporting quarterly to us. So that's progress. We still are what we consider below standard on the use of city attorney letterhead, which is supposed to be the last call before a collection agency, saying that the city may issue a lien or may send you to collection. And it's a best practice to use that, because it sort of heightens the awareness that this is the last chance before collection. We don't have good cooperation on that. And another area where we're lax is the actually timely referral to collection agencies. And what Amir said is absolutely right. As time goes on, the ability to collect diminishes. So the fact that the ad code says that we should refer within generally 45 days of delinquency, we're way beyond that. We have significant dollars on the city's books that are more than 2 years old that haven't been referred. And so that's an area that is, we really should focus on. And the last area is that to encourage prompt payment, it's a best practice to add penalties and interest to accounts, so people realize that, hey, if I don't pay, there's going to be a consequence. And so that's a very mixed bag, that there are many departments that do not have penalties and interest, and we think that's an area too that we could see better performance.
From my point of view, that's the big question. There has to be, it shouldn't be a choice to use best practices. Mm-hmm. I mean, and how we put more clout behind it is one of the things we have to figure out. I shouldn't say this, but basically, if you don't have everybody working together and on the same page and doing best practices, your collection sheriff is Don Knotts without a gun, and I don't think that's what we want. We really want the absolute toughest practice, and we can't afford to leave a penny uncollected that could be.
And I do want to recognize the efforts, because when the controller issued her audit, Laura Chick, in 2007, she issued 35 recommendations. 20 of those were directly related to action items for finance. And other than 2 that we had a difference of opinion, we've either fully implemented or are in the process of having fully implemented all of those recommendations. And some of the others, and the controllers here as well, but I think departments have made progress. It's just probably been, it's definitely slower than what finance would like, but recognizing that they have other priorities as well.
From my point of view, of course, this should be the top priority, because
I'm with you.
Everything we don't do costs us money, and we're not in a position to not engage in all the best practices. Other committee members' questions for finance?
I'd like to hear from CAO and before.
If not, we'll move on to the CAO next, and then the CLA.
We have some comments on item 1 on the proposed motion, but generally my piece of this conversation would be some of the efforts that we're undertaking for next year's proposed budget, because as you said, every dollar that we can raise in revenues is going to help us immensely with our budget problem and potentially avoid some cuts. But we are, as we usually do every year, conducting a base review of our fees for services. This year we'll specialize in one department in particular, the department that we feel that has the most likelihood of achieving some major revenues. That would be the fire department, but we have not kicked off that project yet, but we are working with the fire department to see if we can commence that study and have the results of that study in time for the mayor's proposed budget. As you know, in our city and our state, we're very constrained in how we can raise revenues either through Prop 218 or Prop 13. And where we often find ourselves with new revenues is that it requires a vote of the people per Prop 218. The next election is in June 8th of 2010. It is a state primary election, and we are considering several revenue ideas that we may bring forth to council very shortly for their consideration that would require a Prop 218 vote, but there's other issues that we also may want to put on the ballot with respect to either pension reform or civil service reform. And again, those decisions have to be made by the council and the mayor, but the timeline on that, the latest that council can make a decision on these ballot issues is early February of 2010. So we would have to come forward, and we expect to come forward with a report to council very shortly.
Okay, how about the CLA? Any comments from the CLA on this? Or do we have anyone from the CLA in the room? If not, why don't we hear from the fire department?
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Georgia Matera, Fire Administrator for the Fire Department. I appreciate Pam's comments and David's, and we are actively working as closely as we can to refer those uncollectibles that remain on the ambulance billing to collections. Last I reported to, I believe it was Budget and Finance Committee, was that we're in the process right now of finalizing an agreement with the outside collection vendor to go ahead and begin the process of sending the uncollectibles to collections. And so we're, in terms of, we have an agreement that we're finalizing with our city attorney, as well as making sure that the information is HIPAA compliant and that it's encrypted so that when the vendor receives it, it's protected, as well as when they transmit it back, it's protected coming back. So we are in the final throes of doing that, and as soon as that's resolved with the vendor, all those uncollectibles that we have remaining, which is roughly about 126 million, we anticipate will go to collections.
Any questions?
One thing, and I appreciate the work you've done when it's come to budget and finance. The one thing, the reason we asked for this number, I guess 6 and 7 to be on the agenda, is that with all of the efforts that everybody's making to deal with the funds, on these two reports, I think the last entry we have is something like March 2008, where the two departments, finance and fire and finance and police got together, and we still have, from a 2007 audit, a bunch of questions that are unresolved. And that was the reason that we brought it, because we said, when we go back in the record, it appeared that audits looked at it and said, okay, work together, but I guess they never said come back. And so we're now well over a year from the last time that you were all in a room, and we were hopeful that a lot of these non-compliant statements by finance would be now in compliance, so that we can say we've done a clean sweep of the controller's audit, because a lot of the material in the controller's audit is basically common business practices. And if we, we've kind of hashed over our system, and I think, Mr. Luther, we asked the CAO to give us kind of a breakdown of the steps within the system so that we could make sure departments knew what we expected of them, because it was, I don't know if we have one document that says within 45 days you do this. And so we've asked for those kinds of things, but if we, and I think we made some progress at the fire department, now we don't classify every debt as a true debt. There's some that legally we can't declare. So that saves that headline once a year that $300 million is being lost, and we find out legally you can't go after a good portion of it. But what I want to make sure is that if, and with the chair here, if we can use this meeting to ask that what was asked back in March 2008, that we can ask again and say, we're not going to give you that much time, but by January, when we come back from the recess, can we have the fire department and Office of Finance and the police department and Office of Finance to do a clean sweep on the audit and say, here's where we are. We've solved all these issues. We've moved forward on them. Because if we can't get the two biggest departments who's generating that kind of revenue and Office and Finance on the same page, we're going to catch heck down the road trying to chase book fees for the library. I mean, so this is real money. I mean, this is not, little dollars. This is real money in these audits that we need both departments to, and I read some of the statements that we responded to. In many instances, you guys are sparring with each other. And what we really need is you to have a fundamental agreement that we want to get the money that's owed to the city and figure out how do we do it. And it appears we're into preferences as a sense of saying, well, I like it this way, or we have a system that's already in place. We just want the three departments to figure out how to comply and what's the revenue that we're generating. That's the sum and substance of, and one of the things that's worked us more harshly in the Finance Committee, because we dealt with these things one at a time. If this report was done back in March of 2008, a lot of the stuff that we've been churning in Budget and Finance would have not had to been done. We've just taken pieces and we've moved here and we've moved there. So that's what I'd like to see, is that we can get away from the sparring and have these two reports back in January at our first meeting or whatever, and you come in here and we can sing Kumbaya for about 20 minutes, and then we can say, this, what we've just agreed to is going to raise the city X number of millions of dollars. Because that's the whole essence of what we're trying to get to. These little things where we mandate from Budget and Finance that every department reports their fee issues every year. Okay, that's a little piece. And then every chance we get, we put in every CAO report, ask the general managers to comply with Executive Order 5. And we just keep rolling and rolling. And when we finish, we end up with 250 people, on one list that are not paying us our bills. And then we end up with departments just, it took us, 3 years to get them to report at 100% rate?
Yes.
And yet we're still not over the big hump of 45 days.
Yes.
Those debts, unless there's something legally binding against it, 45 days, that debt should be in Office of Finance, in the hands of people that professionally go out and recoup that money. And that's what we need to get to, because otherwise we'll all be off this committee by the time this report gets finalized, and we just in Budget and Finance, we just want to see the money. Yeah. Show me the money. That's what our number one interest is. And to write another report and spar with each other just seems like it's a waste of all of our time. That's what we like to get to.
Richard T. Fank, Executive Director of the Police Commission. I'd like to respond to all the questions because I think we have made significant progress in the Police Department since the September 2008 report. Backdrop, I'll give you the revenue increases that we've had, then I'll go back and address point by point each of the issues that was raised in the last finance status report. Our false alarm revenue is the main revenue source that people looked at and that the controller's audit looked at. The revenues, to give you an example, in 2004-05 fiscal year, the revenues were $3.5 million that were raised, 5-6, 4.5, and 6-7 it went to $9 million, 7-8, 8.6 million, and 08-09, 8.3 million. And in the years 07, 08, 08, 09, the budgeted revenue for the budget was to be 7.2 million. We significantly increased our revenue in those areas. Part of the dilemma in the false alarm situation was the fact that we had a old false alarm system, which was basically a management system of false alarms, but not a billing and collecting system. We had disparate systems working not together. We had our own standalone false alarm system that categorized and tracked alarm calls. Communications was operating on their own database, not interfacing with the false alarm database. And then we had no interface with LA Tax when payments were made. So we had ITA, Office of Finance, LAPD Communications, and Police Commission, Commission Investigation Division, all working on this, coming at it from different ways. And what really started our downfall is when a call would come into the communications center reporting a false alarm, and these were generally for non-permitted alarms. So you have permitted alarms and non-permitted. So I'm driving down the street and I hear alarm at 12344 4th Street. I call it into dispatch as a 911 call, and the public safety representative puts in 1234 East 4th Street, and we dispatch a police car, but there's no such address. If that address is not corrected under our old system, that address stayed with that bill all the way through the collection process. So when a bill was automatically generated for $115, it was sent to occupant 1234 East 4th Street, and it would come back, no such person. 50% of our bills that were mailed out came back, errors in the mailing addresses. And we were paying for that batch mailing that occurred on a monthly basis by a third-party contractor through ITA. It became very clear and apparent to me when I assumed my position that we needed a modern system. We were able to work with the council at that time and create a burglar alarm trust fund. There was a $25 penalty attached to every burglar alarm fine that then went into a trust fund, which the intent was to purchase a new software system. Some monies were swept from that. I believe it was fiscal year 07-08. But sufficient funds were left for us to go out and purchase a new software system. And that software system was purchased in late 2008, became fully operational and implemented July 1 of 2009. It's called Cry Wolf. And the benefit of what we have gotten out of Cry Wolf it gives us a dichotomy, and I'll explain that to you in a few moments. Cry Wolf interfaces with the police department's computer-aided dispatch system. We also paid for an interface with LA Tax. Part of this was to sweep all of the old accounts, all of the accounts that had multiple temporary permits, because when an alarm call came into a bad address, and then another bad address would come in, those were created as temporary permits to keep the tracking mechanism. But they were uncollectible debt. We were never going to get that money. If you referred it to collections, you were never going to collect it because you had no address to go collect the money. The only collectibles you had were those that were permitted alarms, or those that we had good addresses on that were non-permitted, which was a very small universe of the non-permitted addresses. With Cry Wolf, we have the interface. So now what occurs is a false alarm comes in to dispatch. The PSR will automatically see that address. If it's a permitted address or non-permitted address, they can verify that address in their geo file immediately that it's a good or a bad address. If it's a good address, they dispatch the unit comes back, enters it as a false alarm, it automatically goes to our Cry Wolf system. The following morning, our staff will review that, make sure there's no issues, and automatically generate a bill right out of our office, and the bills go out once a week through General Services Division now, General Services Department. We don't have a third-party contractor. We have taken and increased our payment, again, this is just since July 1 of 09, from about 58% of what we mailed out for billings in our old system to now we're at 80%. We get 3% of our mail returned for bad addresses. So we did a lot of things to interface the piece, and now the beauty also is when that payment is made to finance and it's inputted into LA Tax, it immediately updates our system so we have the current data, what's going on. I can give you day by day the revenue that is being collected for false alarms based on the fact that that update is coming from LA Tax. The downside is this. We have current council policy, after 2 false alarms in a 365 consecutive day period, there's no dispatch unless it's a verified response. So now the PSR sees that call comes in. There's been 3 alarms, not going to dispatch it, going to broadcast and file it. No unit buys the call, no unit responds to it. There's no false alarm billing. In the past, there would have been a false alarm building. Maybe collectible, maybe not, but you're saving the resources of 2 police officers going out to this false alarm call because we're better managing the alarms. So I think that from a revenue side, we have done a very good job internally. Put some additional staff in. We focused on going after the The accounts that we knew we could collect, we're using city attorney letterhead. We're using the collection, citywide collection, and also the other collection units for under $5,000. We also have staff assigned to going after our high-value accounts. Give you an example. We have one corporate client in this city that owed us $50,000 in false alarms for a number of their individual activities throughout the city. We collected that money. We have one now we're going after for close to $100,000. But what takes us the time on those, we have to go back. They want documentation on every false alarm. So we have to print the call out. We have to do all that level of work. But we have one staff person working on those high-volume accounts. When we have a high account that owes us a lot of money, we send one of our field enforcement officers out to make personal contact. So I think all of those things put together have generated the additional revenue for us. And I expect this year the revenue budgeted is $9.5 million. I expect us to come in between $8 and $9 million because we're seeing a reduction, remember, in alarm dispatches. But I think the collection rate is going to increase that.
Let me ask one thing. Is the percentage of false alarms drop?
No, sir. They're still about 97%. Still about 97%. Let me address point by point, if you'd like, through the report. I'd be happy to address what we have done to respond to each of the issues.
That'd be great.
Number one was the fact that our fees were not current at the time. This report was generated, which was in September of 2008. We had submitted our fee report to the council in September of August of 07. The CAO had that report to council in August of 08, updating it for the 0809 dollar amounts. They were approved by council and went into effect November 1 of 2008. So we're current. There was no fee adjustment made this fiscal year because there was no salary adjustment. And again, the way the fees are determined, it's based on time and motion. You take the number of people that are doing a function, you take their salary, their cap rate, and then that's what generates what you will have as the fee. So you just can't grab a number out of the air and have that be your number. So if there's no salary adjustment, therefore there's no fee adjustment to the permits. On the second item, which was to ensure that the cost is being recovered, again, we did that through the fee analysis that we did. The third item in the report was to benchmark other cities' success and increase the false alarm fee and also have a late renewal penalty. There is a late renewal penalty now on the permits. That is in place. Again, that is done by the Office of Finance, not by LAPD. We don't have the ability to assess the late permit fee or a penalty fee because we're not recovering our cost. Our cost is in the response or the processing of that permit or response to false alarm. The $10 penalty now is an administrative penalty that's administered by the Office of Finance. So if there's going to be any increase in that, we believe that should come citywide through the Office of Finance because it's not a service that we're providing on our end to do that additional billing process that comes out of the Office of Finance.
Let me stop you right there. This is one of the points I think that we go back and forth. Finance is telling us that it's an ordinance created by LAPD to figure out the $10, and if it needs to increase, then LAPD should recommend a change in the ordinance. They're only charging what's in the ordinance. So the issue is, you guys, the police department says, well, we only have the authority of the ordinance, which is the number. And I think that's where this tension is created, where it makes us no difference who creates the ordinance and gets the dollars increase. The issue is, if it should be more than $10, we should have an ordinance that changes 10 to 15. And so,
Sir, I agree. I'll prepare the document. All I need from finance is how much time it takes for them to do that, and I'll prepare the report.
Okay.
That's easy to do. I have no
that's
argument
one
with
of those that we need to get resolved because.
I can fix that for you.
Okay.
That's not a problem.
Yeah, I think that would work because that's what we do with fire. We give them our processing cost and then there are administrative costs on their side, so they put it together.
That's easy.
That works.
That's easy.
So when should we expect you to come back to the committee?
As soon as they
with
give
that
me the
result?
information, I'll have the report. We'll run it through the police commission. It'll be forwarded over. That's an easy report to do once I get the information.
So hopefully sometime beginning of next year.
I would hope sooner than that, but clearly we'll move on as quickly as we get the information. That's not a
Right.
problem for us at all. Number 5 is the issue of the outreach effort for public awareness. We have done a lot of work in this area, created a new door hanger, as I mentioned to you. We identify the high volume accounts. We have our individual officers, when they're doing field work, go out and make contact. We're focusing on the major corporate clients that we have that have created problems for us. We do the city attorney letterhead program, and we're also doing the Office of Finance citywide collection as well as the other collection payments. It is interesting that we get a very low return on those that are given to collection. We get a better return on the citywide attorney letterhead program. We don't get very good results on the collection. The only time we will get results is if an individual who had an item go to collection and they were able to be identified and the collecting company put a notice on their TRW or whatever their credit report might be, they then will call because they want to get that fixed because they're trying to get some credit and have a $100 alarm bill on theirs. I think we're addressing those issues.
Number 4.
Number 4.
Because we dealt with 3 on the $10 issue.
Number 4, again, for us, I don't know how we could, and again, I'd be happy to do the work, but I don't know how we can calculate the cost of borrowing money to offset the fact that these funds are not coming in. I don't know how I could cost out at all if a person owes a $115 alarm bill, what the cost of borrowing money is for that unique universe of false alarm fines, to be able to identify what that cost would be. If I could get that information, I'd be happy to write the report, but I absolutely have no idea how that could be calculated.
I think you're talking about a fee for additional interest for the delinquency?
The interest in the time that it takes, and what we have suggested at the Revenue Management Committee meeting is Finance calculates annually a rate that we charge for our tax accounts. It's a formula that we've distributed, and annually we tell departments if they, in lieu of that, they may as well use, we don't have a citywide rate, but this is the rate that reflects the cost of borrowing, and so we would say in lieu, why not use the rate that's calculated by Finance? So, Richard, we can get that to you.
No, are you saying that they should have that, even though they have the reapplication fee, you're still saying they should have the interest fee incrementally added?
The reapplication fee is supposed to cover the cost of if there's additional investigation to reissue the permit. That's supposed to reflect the cost for that. Okay. In the same time, if the time that's gone by, if they were supposed to renew in January and the city's not doing the reapplication until June, the city really has lost the cost of that. So of the 6 months. And so
you're saying it should be tacked on?
That would be our view, that for full cost recovery, which is our bottom line, that we would think that. But in some cases, system constraints, or there are some administrative problems with that are built into the ordinances that preclude that. So that's why it has to be looked at on a department-by-department basis.
Again, we'll be happy to do that if we can get the expertise of Finance. Again, I have no idea how to calculate, and I'm pretty good at this stuff, how to calculate what $115 overdue account would be as far as the cost of borrowing money.
So you said there's a formula?
Yes.
Okay, so if we can get that?
I'll be happy to include that in the other report I spoke about. The next item, I believe, is item 6, and the increase from $115 to $136 was part of the August 2007 report we did. It was approved by council and effective July 4th of 2009. So the rate has gone to $136 now. The delay in that process, part of it was the analysis by the CAO's office of our recommendations, and then another part of the analysis, quite frankly, got lost in the city attorney's office bringing forward the ordinance to implement. And it is effective July 4th of 2009.
That's a common issue that we asked the CAO to assist us in the budget to make sure that these ordinances get done as close to July 1st as possible, and that's something we'll just keep pushing on.
It's very important, again, back to the ordinance that changed all the permit fees. All of the vast majority of our revenue from permit fees, forgetting about false alarms, but all police permits, comes between the period of November 1st, when the billings go out, and typically the end of January. So if there's any fee adjustments, they need to occur when those billings go out, or you're not going to capture your revenue. Yeah. And so that's real.
What do we ask for December? In the budget, we asked every department to respond by December as to any fee increase?
I don't recall specifically.
Okay.
I would just say, sir, that from our experience, December would be too late because the bills are generated by Office of Finance on November 1.
Okay, all right. All right.
That's from our experience.
Okay.
The next item is item 7, which is the new system that we have and the citywide billing and the alarm management system. Our Cry Wolf fully complies with that now. Again, I have all the data with that. We also have worked with ITA under the old system to have a streamline of our information. So I believe we have a very good handle on the citywide collection, probably with Cry Wolf payments that are made on a daily basis that are implemented in LA Tax. I think we're on top of those. The next item is item 8, which is the referral of citywide accounts. And we have done that, sir. We've done very well, I believe, in that. We've referred over 490 accounts worth $127,000. Those accounts go to citywide collection for over 5,000. Those under 5,000 go to the NCO, which is the current contractor, and we're looking at using other contractors the city have. So I believe that we have very aggressively utilized the collection accounts when those are due and payable. The last is...
Let me ask you a question on that. Did they draw a line between permitted and not permitted accounts?
We're referring all, sir.
All of them, okay.
Yes, sir. We're referring all.
Okay, so that's done.
The non-permitted were the ones that were more difficult for us because, again, it was lack of good addresses and a name of an individual to go do the collection to. So we have continued to refer those accounts.
When you said refer it to collection, do you have a separate collection group than what finance does?
No, sir.
So when you say collection, it's going to them?
Over $5,000, and correct me if I'm wrong on the number, $5,000 or more goes to the Office of Finance citywide collection unit. Under $5,000 goes to one of the contracted collection agencies. And we do both, sir.
All right, very good.
Number 9, excuse me, is our alarm school. We no longer do alarm school by people. We now do a mail-out program, and effective February of 2010, it will be online. As part of Cry Wolf, we had the resources and money available. Motorola we're doing a contract amendment with Motorola with some additional funds that we had in the contract to do an online system where we're developing basically 300 questions that if you have a false alarm that you want waived, there you go online. I believe 20 questions of what you will do. So out of the 300, the computer will sort and shoot you 20 questions. You complete the online school. That one fee is waived, and we get greater compliance hopefully through that mechanism. So we are now doing a mail-out program. The mail-out program first started for seniors and folks who were unable to have transportation to come to the class. I will say the mail-out program, our response to that is less than when we were doing the alarm schools, but we expect the online program to generate greater revenues for us to get collection there. So I believe we have responded to all of the issues with the exception of the 2 that have been highlighted, and we'll be happy to work with the Office of Finance and bring you a report back through the commission to address those issues.
So let me just ask on number 9, so I understand it. So have you eliminated everything other than the online, or are you still going to do mail out and hand deliver?
We'll still do the mail out, and we'll do online both.
Okay, and then, but the school is
The
now
school is
gone?
eliminated. We are no longer doing school.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Parks, I was talking to some of our staff in the CO's office. The budgets are submitted December 18th to the mayor and council, the proposed budgets, and we can put a status report or a roll-up of the fees that are being proposed for 10-11 from the department budgets in the January financial status report that will go to.
I didn't hear.
We can do a roll-up of the fees that are being proposed for
Okay.
10-11 in the January financial status report.
Okay.
One last item. As part of this entire process that we did, taking the audits very seriously and the deficiencies that we had, quite frankly, and we'll admit to those deficiencies. And I believe we've taken the appropriate corrective actions to move forward. Commission Investigation Division, the Police Commission, had never done a write-off of a bad debt. We did write-offs back from January 1 of 1982 through December 31 of 2005, and referred to the board. The write-off board has been just under $7 million, and there's one report that's pending their approval for $2.3 million, but they have approved the write-off of the $4.6 million. So we have taken very aggressively on those accounts that are no longer collectible to write those off. We're utilizing the citywide collection. We're utilizing the Office of Finance citywide collection, the collecting companies, the city attorney letterhead program, the aggressive going out and focusing on the high corporate accounts, along with field officers going out and serving the notices. And I think that we have responded well. I think the revenues generated that we have demonstrated that we have brought in on the false alarms have been very positive to deal with that issue. And I would expect, again, that with Cry Wolf, we will have even better results as to the payment. Again, the balancing, though, I expect false alarm dispatches to go down, saving police resources, but compensatory with that will be the reduction in some revenues. So it's a trade-off on those two issues. On the permit revenue, very briefly, I'll address that also because I think revenue also with police permits is important. Our police permit revenue for the general items that we issue police permits for in 07-08 was $4.8 million. In 08-09, it was $5.4 million. And to this period, it's $310,000. Remember, the vast majority of that will be renewals that will come in between the period of November 1 through the end of January, because that's when the bulk of the revenues come in. There is one area that we are going to lose about $500,000 in, and that is in the 07-08 budget. There was Assembly Bill 781 that was introduced and signed by the governor, which took away from municipalities the authority to license masseuse parlors, massage parlors, et cetera. And that revenue was one of our largest permit revenues. We had about 4,000 permits, and that equals about a $500,000 drop. So in the projected revenues, we indicated that to the department. So the revenue projection for last fiscal year was 5.4. For this year, it's 4.9, taking in account that reduction because we'll no longer be able to issue those massage parlor permits as of September 1 of 2009.
Didn't you say there was a court decision?
No, sir. It was a Senate Bill 731, I'm sorry. It was introduced in the legislature. It took the licensing and permitting and gave it to the California Massage Therapists Association. So they're regulating themselves and took the ability of cities away to regulate. You can still require a business tax certificate, a business license, but you cannot any longer require the police permit that we used to require, and that was one of our high volume permits, as well as one of our high utilization of resources to deal with complaints, et cetera. So that's an overall perspective on those. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but again, we will work with the Office of Finance to get those back.
Going through your presentation from my notes is that the only thing outstanding is 3 and 4. Okay.
And we'll deal with those within the next 30 days, sir.
A question for finance. Does anyone ever do a cost-benefit analysis of in-house versus outsourcing EMS billing and collections?
Do you want to go ahead and speak to that? That's a really good question. Actually, I think what I'd like to say is that the committee members would be pleased to know that on the 17th of November, our Fire Commission approved our report regarding the outsourcing of ambulance billing and collections. And so that is making its way to the mayor's office and then ultimately to the CAO for report. And then we'll be coming to council with the cost-benefit analysis, the staffing plans, and everything that we've been talking about for the last, it's been a 7-year-long effort, and we're finally here.
So, but just in general, is which way works more effectively?
Ultimately, what we looked at was 2 vendors. One was there's 2 pieces to the equation, and much of the audit recommendations that the Office of Finance came back with talk about the ambulance billing process. We have a field data collection system that will generate. What will happen is the paramedics out in the field will be dispatched to a call. That information from the dispatch from the CAD will go to our handheld tough books. Those will issue, all the patient information will be on there. There will be a reader, barcode reader that you'll swipe the person's driver's license. That information gets captured. That gets electronically transmitted both to the hospital for patient care and to a billing unit that is not going to be, that we're currently doing, that will be outsourced, and they will go ahead and process all the billing for us, and we'll be able to see we believe a greater collection and revenue.
So would that outsource from the beginning, or would we do some preliminary steps in-house?
We are really, what's going to happen is it's going to essentially, it'll take several months, but we'll turn over the entire function to the outside vendors, and we'll have a couple of core staff that will remain in terms of contract compliance and HIPAA compliance, and that essentially will be it. We have 52 people that are assigned to the ambulance billing unit. We anticipate that we'll keep 3 of the existing, which do the legal staffing, and that will represent the city on a legal basis. And we're asking for 6 different authorities to do the specific work of the contract, and then essentially the rest will go through the city process of layoff or displacement.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Let me ask, on the issue, when you mentioned the 250 folks that are the highest,
Yeah.
I guess, in deficit, what I thought was interesting, and we couldn't figure out a connection, is that if they're listed, the first reaction we had was that we thought they'd be on the list of the city attorney having filed against them. There doesn't seem to be a correlation, because the numbers that we have from the city attorney is that although there's millions of dollars in the pipeline, we've only recovered something like $3 million in the last couple of 3 years. Is there a correlation? If they hit that list, does that tell us that the city attorney has filed on them for failure to pay, or?
There's
How
a
does that
couple of different things, because being on the list doesn't preclude you from any other collection action. So, for example, there are a lot of parking lot operators that are on the list, and we have been working with the police commission to try and revoke their police permits, or if they are unpermitted, to try and shut them down. And that's one of the programs that the council has adopted, which is, we're ramping up. At the same time that they could be submitted to the police commission for revocation, they would be also prepared if they've gone through the process. They're not, we would take 1 or 2 efforts to try and notify them about the bill. Then they would be sent to the city attorney for litigation. I think the numbers that the city attorney prepared for you talk about cases that are going out of statute that have to be filed before a statutory deadline. So I'm not sure that what the city attorney's office provided is the entire universe.
Okay, well, we'll have to look at that. Okay.
Yeah, and I have a couple of questions back for the CAO's office. In more broad terms, what do we think of the idea of consolidating all collections functions from all departments, either under the finance department, under another department, or creating a new department? And if we did that, what would it look like?
I can provide a partial answer to that. There is an ongoing study to centralized billing functions. There's a consultant that's been hired that's been studying this, and from my understanding, they're at the point where they're at the draft report stage, but they have not finalized the report. But I have not reviewed that report. The Office of Finance has been involved, so maybe they want to speak to that issue. But obviously, we're waiting to see what the report says. There's a couple ways to consolidate functions, and one can contemplate moving all the staff to one agency and having all of the billing functions performed by that one agency, or one can envision a centralized model in which the staff still remain and perform activities but report to in an enhanced way from what's being done now to the centralized agency, which would be the Office of Finance. We're aware that there's going to be systems issues. And again, there's a variety of ways to look at that as well. I mean, you can consolidate all of the billing functions to one central system, but that is going to be problematic for a city the size of Los Angeles. We have, again, finance can speak more to this, but we do have silos where departments develop their own systems, and trying to integrate all of that data into one centralized system is going to have some challenges.
Yes, we would agree with most of what the CAO has said, that the consultant is finalizing their report. We expect it to be out in 2 to 3 weeks. At that time, it would be transmitted to the mayor and council. And we asked them to identify what would be the system constraints. Could we use the new FMS system that the city's already using to be a centralized billing system? Certainly there will be a lot of discussion as the report comes forward, but I think the controller's audit first recommended that the city centralized, recognizing that it would be expensive, and then the council adopted a motion to take a look at it. And so there is a centralization task force of many city departments, and so the report we expect to be transmitted early in the new year.
And a general question about ERIP. How is that affecting collections? How many collections personnel are on the list of people that have retired or will be retiring early? And if some of them are we looking at those being some of the folks that we hire back under the 6%?
Yes, we're still assessing the impacts of ERIP because the window's still open and there's still a lot of movement with people retracting and such. But the personnel department has offered to take the lead on interviewing department general managers to find what we call the ERIP holes. And the ERIP holes in accounting, in particular in payroll, there are a lot of ERIP participants in those functions, and there's some concern in that area as well as fleet and some other areas. But the assessment process is actually going to start being kicked off this week. We'll have to develop plans for that. I think the difficulty with that specific function is if they're outside hires, they're controlled through the ERIP backfill. We cannot hire and replace those people with outside resources. We will have to find some other way to either move people into those positions or just dramatically look at the way we're providing service and see where we can find efficiencies. Miguel Santana has also, the CAO has also said at council and in other various meetings that we may have to resolve this through consolidations. We may have several departments that cannot operate their accounting function or their payroll function with the staff they have left, so we may have to look at consolidations as an alternative way of providing the service just to keep functioning.
And I think directly as that relates to finance, those employees assigned to the citywide collection unit, approximately 30 employees, I really expect to lose about a third of those by spring of 2010. Ironically enough, the primary classes of investigator and tax compliance officer are exempt from ERIP, but we've also had a number of employees already indicated that they will be retiring anyway. So we do expect some significant losses, and we will, as a result, have to restructure.
Right.
Mr. Luther, did you say that, just make clear that on the ERIP, there's a mandate that we can't hire the retired people back, right?
That was clarified by Tom Coltis that we could still hire 90 days. The 90
days, but not as a permanent or a contract.
That's correct.
Not by okay.
Within the Commission Investigation Division, we're not impacted by ERIP at this point. The staffing issues we have are basically with the hiring freezes, but we're able to manage with what we have now, and particularly in the alarm unit. Since the alarm and permit sections are revenue generated, we focus on staffing in those units so we can continue to deliver the service to the public, but also to get the revenue in the door.
For fire, we're going to be we're challenged a bit. Currently we have a 25% vacancy rate just with the managed hiring. We anticipate we have 38 people that have filed for the ERIP. Many of them are obviously fall under the Administrative Services Bureau, which is the one that I oversee. And so we are looking potentially at roughly around a 35, approaching a 40% vacancy rate. So what we're doing internally is we have an outside consultant that has come in who is helping us to look at our organization to see how we can restructure while maintaining key services. Obviously payroll, we are definitely thin on staff. Even when we're fully staffed, we have 5 members of a payroll unit to support 4,000 sworn members. So we are definitely, to lose 2 people that are filed under the ERIP will cause a considerable problem for us in payroll. So we're actively working on that and coming up with a plan to mitigate some of these potential shortfalls.
Thank you. Any other questions relating to items 2, 6, and 7?
Mr. Chair, if I could ask that on 6 and 7, if we can have that come back, another response in January. And I would like to see if we can get finance to do a similar format as they did in their September 2008 report that tells us where we are updated for both departments, and then we know what's resolved, what's pending. But January would be something that just before the budget, we'd have some idea that all these things are resolved.
Yes, we can do that.
So mid-January, late January?
Yeah, I think if we can get it mid-January, it'd be great.
Okay, and before we do anything else with those, I'd like to bring up someone hopefully from President Garcetti's office to answer questions on item 1 and the CAO's office to stick around on that. And item 1 is the proposal that we create a commission to review the way we do our collections and the way we finance city expenditures. I don't know if you want to do any kind of an opening statement or just be available to answer questions on this.
Well, I'll just say thank you so much for, good afternoon, Cecilia Cabello, Council President Garcetti's office. Thank you for the consideration of the motion. I think a lot of this stems from the fact of what Mr. Luther mentioned earlier, which is with ERIP and the potential loss of over 2,400 people. And with the implementation of FMS coming in about a year and a half, we're poised to kind of figure out where we are with our collections revenues and our different systems in place, and we'll see what we can do moving forward to improve that. And we think a fresh perspective from our business and our civic leaders could help shape that.
You know, the one thing that seemed unusual, and I'm not sure if we want to go the route suggested in the motion, is the motion suggests that we create a commission to deal with collections and how we finance expenditures. And those two things seem like pretty diverse tasks. The one that seems the most obviously necessary is the idea of creating a commission to study collections, which is a broad problem and I think has a specific group of skill sets and the people we would look to sit on that commission. So I don't know if my thought would be to have a commission focus on that piece of it. I don't know if
That's fine.
your office
Yeah.
has a thought on that.
We're amenable to that. That's
Okay.
fine.
And also wanted to ask the CAO what you think about this commission, how we should structure it, how we should form it.
I did have an opportunity to speak to Miguel Santana, the CAO, about it, and he does support the motion. His only caveat was that it does contain a sunset clause, and he would support that sunset clause too, so it'd be a very focused commission with a very discrete piece of work. I think the motion instructs or asks the CAO to report back within a set amount of days with recommendations on the commission, which we should be able to turn around, I think, very quickly. But what we'll probably address in the report is perhaps again the composition of the commission, so that we do get I think our concern is that we make sure we get the right people on that commission that have the expertise that will help solve some of the issues that the motion seeks to address. There is an issue of staffing, and that can be, we'll look at that in the report, what kind of commission this will be. Opportunities for adding staff to the commission or having a department support the commission in a heavy way are going to be, in our opinion, somewhat limited. Just simply because of everything else that's going on with the city, even with reduced staffing that's coming our way. The last thing that we would seek to address is just to make sure there's no overlap with some of the existing commissions. There was talk earlier today about the Revenue Management Committee, and there's I'm not familiar with it, but there is a BTAC committee that looks at business tax issues. We would want to focus the work of the commission so that it does not conflict or overlap with those existing authorities.
And what do you think the mission statement of the commission would look like? How do you envision that?
I think the ultimate goal of what we would hope to see from the commission is outside experts. I think that's always a good idea if it's the right group of people that would look at the city from a different point of view and come up with suggestions that would generate real revenue. That's the goal.
And any thoughts on who the appointing authorities should be, which committees, or?
We have not gone to that level of detail, but we can address that in the report if you wish.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd suggest is there are probably a few committees that obviously have a connection. So I hope you'd consider in that budget and finance and public safety and audits each having the ability to appoint someone, and then whomever else, the president's office, the mayor's office, whomever else seems logical. But I think they all should have a piece of that, I would think. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of concerns. One, I want to make sure, and I go along with what I think you said, that we get the right people, that this isn't a commission that's worried about gender balance. It's not worried about geographic balance. Let's throw out the rules we normally use for commissions. And two, the 2-year time frame, frankly, in my opinion, is too long. We don't have 2 years to fix the problem. Mr. Parks and I were talking about that just earlier. 2 years is going to be too late. And so I really think you need to do a very short, very fast, focused, whether it's 6 months or a year at the most, but 6 months more likely, to come up with some real solutions for us. Otherwise, we might be fixing things that are already done. It's over with by then.
Yeah.
We've got 1 year in this budget to fix this city, or we're done. That's quite frankly it. So
I
would
think
shorten
that's a
it.
great suggestion.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion.
We're amenable to 6 months, that's fine.
Let me just ask one thing. When we use the term commission, is that by charter additional authorities or powers as opposed to a task force, or, is that, or just that's the term? I was just wondering if.
It could go either way. Okay. We would probably recommend against establishing a formal commission with position authorities and an executive assistant.
That's what I was wondering, whether that term drives a commitment of personnel compared to task force that we've used in the past that is very fluid, and whether one or the other, I think when we dealt with task force, they still dealt with the Brown Act, but does that put us, the term commission put us in a more formal sense than what our intent is? I was just wondering, because I know it's been years since I've read about it. There's something in the charter about formal commissions that drive something above the fluid nature of just.
Yeah, we'll have discussions with the council office, the council president's office on their intent, but it could go either way. A formal commission with, as you stated, some issues with the city charter and how it's constructed, or it could be an advisory group or a task force, or whatever it ends up. We'll address that in the report, but it does not, I don't believe, necessarily have to come with the formal authority of a standing commission. It would be subject, of course, probably to the Brown Act because of the appointees.
Okay. And then the other one, and just a little different opinion on, when I talked to the president about the motion when he put it forward, one of the things that we were hopeful in that little phrase, finance city expenditures, what's important that we grapple with on the budget and finance is that we have these periods of time where we're going through now where we're taking, and this is a great example, we're taking cash money from special parking revenue and we're building parking lots on a credit card. Those are the kind of things that we'd hope in that little phrase that we talk about, how much Mikola compared to, should it be 80% bricks and mortar and 20% buying radios and cars instead of the reverse that we have now. We've constantly talked about one-time money and how, more formally how that should be used. Mr. Smith has talked for 3 years about the rainy day fund. How do we have created one, but how does it become a part of the overall funding strategy? Those are things that we had hoped to address. Now, whether that piece can be pulled out for a city CAO summer study or some other form, but that we can't ignore that because we've made some progress on our budget policies, but not the depth that we should. Our tendency in council is you tell us, okay, we can use this Mikola money, but we haven't reached our 6%. But you don't tell us just what does that cost us. I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, we spent $200 million on debt service alone. Those missing links would be a totally different discussion if we're sitting in council and says, well, debt service on Mikola is $200 million, and we haven't even gotten to trans and all those other things. That's the stuff that's disconnected, where there's a sense that you can say yes on that item, just add 15 million to it. The problem is, at some point, that's a healthy amount of debt service, particularly on many of our MICLA items have basically, I guess, worn out before we paid for them. We're putting a 10 or 15 year assignment on MICLA bonds to pay for a car that was basically gotten rid of 6 years before we paid it off. I mean, so that's the whole issue on, I think we were trying to get to on the finance issue. That was a little phrase that we thought we couldn't ignore that we had to get to.
Actually, I have a suggestion. Maybe we could ask when you come back with your report on how to structure the commission, you come back with a recommendation of whether this piece of it is also the commission's task or how we should approach it, how you want to focus on it, whether it's a report, whether it's an internal task force, how you want to deal with that piece of it. But I clearly we don't want to miss that. That's an equally important, fiscal problem for the city.
Yes. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we have a couple speakers on item 1. And since we only have 2 speakers, and I think there's a lot of substance to this, if we could allow them up to 5 minutes each. The first speaker is Ron Galperin, followed by Maya Zutler.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Ron Galperin, and here, of course, to speak on behalf of the motion for creation of this new commission or task force or whatever that's finally going to be structured as. Actually, originally as proposed, it was to be a commission on revenue and efficiency, as it were. What we're facing right now is a crisis, of course, as Councilmember Smith so well pointed out. And the idea of this, I think, and there's a great opportunity to concentrate on all sorts of ways to generate revenue, and collection is a part of that. So I want to touch on a couple things that are, I think, opportunities for this, as we're now in the 21st century, but we're sort of operating in the 20th or maybe even the 19th century when it comes to collections and revenue issues in the city of LA. First of all, revenue generally. It's sort of one of my obsessions, actually, comparing and looking at revenues in Los Angeles to other major cities. And interestingly enough, we've got a budget of about, say, $6.8 billion. About $4.4 billion of that is general fund revenue. You look at that, and it works out to be per capita of about $1,700 per person. For general fund, that's about $1,100 per person. Now, interestingly enough, you compare this to other major cities. You compare this to, say, San Francisco, which, mind you, they're a city-county combo, of course, but they have got a budget that is about $6.6 billion for the next fiscal year for a population of only about 744,000 compared to 4 million people in Los Angeles. And you ask yourself, why is that? Because even once you take out the component of the county, once you take out the various proprietary departments that they include in their budget, we have a lot less that we're generating. And I think that that's a core of the problem of why we never seem to have enough money for the things that we want. So when you look at, for example, what other cities are doing in terms of, San Francisco, and you look at their charges for services versus our charges for services, you also look at the hit that we've taken in terms of some of our major sources of income, and how do we do a better job of collecting those. We could generate hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm really personally very confident of that. So I think that's an incredible opportunity for this particular commission. On collections, obviously there have been a tremendous number of suggestions and reports and follow-ups, but we still have a huge number of unbilled services. And it's not just about collecting money after it's been billed, but all those things that we have not been collecting. And I think there's a great opportunity for the Commission to look at ways to short-circuit that process. One example is we have a lot of money that we're not collecting in police permit fees for alarms. Why not have an ordinance, for example, that says that you cannot renew your central station monitoring until such time as you've paid that, and perhaps even empower and maybe even find an incentive for the alarm companies to go do that? Then we're not running after them to collect that money. There are also a number of other things. We talked about the number of letters that were going out by the police commission to collect money. You look at how the county does this. I'm on the county's Quality and Productivity Commission. We had a meeting with Mark Saladino. He talked about his system. He's got this amazing mail machine, which is hooked up to the Postal Service. Anytime somebody does a change of address, it automatically changes that address before an envelope gets spit out and costs us a bunch of money to mail out to the wrong address. It's also hooked up to a skip tracing system at about 32 cents a name, which in the final analysis is a bargain when you've got something like 300,000 debtors that you've got to collect money from. Real property-related opportunities as well that I think this particular commission can look at. One of the areas that I've been really advocating on for a long time are all of those real property transactions that are happening that are not recorded. You transfer me your house, it gets recorded, we pay the documentary transfer tax, and the assessment goes up. But if it's done through an entity, that has not been happening. San Francisco, again, has been actually collecting huge amounts of money by following up on these kind of transactions. They assigned somebody to actually just read the San Francisco Business Journal and then send out bills. In one transaction alone, they sent out a $30 million bill for documentary transfer tax for a sale of a portfolio of properties from Blackstone to Merrill Lynch. We had similar transactions. Guess how much we collected? How about Zippo? So that's another, I think, incredible opportunity. So I would encourage this committee and the council as a whole to act on this post-haste. And we can have some great people on there and actually make some incredible progress to bring in some money and to do it in a timely fashion and look at a whole bunch of efficiencies, and I'd be happy to talk about any of this in depth. That's it.
Wow, very efficient.
And right on the 5 minutes. That was pretty good.
Thank you for giving me the 5 minutes, by the way.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Maya Zettler on behalf of VICA, Valley Industry Commerce Association. VICA is here today to express our strong support for this motion. As you know, VICA has been at the forefront of advocating for a collection sheriff to oversee and ensure debt collection. We are here today to advocate for a formation of a commission, and hopefully we want to focus a little bit on the structure of the commission to piggyback on what Ron spoke about. We would like to, if possible, state here that we hope that this commission is not comprised of those political type appointments. We want those on the commission, and if it is 10 members, to have the right expertise with a business background, a tax background, a finance background, and perhaps even to have the large business associations in the city recommend folks who could sit on the commission, not just have the mayor and the council recommend folks. I know that our organization and other organizations in the city have recommended commissioners for BTAC and other commissions, and we feel very strongly that this shouldn't be something that is focused solely on political appointments or gender or geographic location, but that those with the right expertise, especially for a commission that is going to be focused on a 6-month time period, to have a very focused commission that can look at these issues and have folks come from a background that can tackle this from day one. So we hope that you can move quickly on this, and we would be happy to make recommendations as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We clearly want people that are policy wonks on this stuff, and not people that are just the typical appointees that are often learning about the subjects that they're regulating. I don't think we want to do that in this particular case. And based on Mr. Galperin's comments, I think it may make sense to try and include the revenue questions along with the collections. If we think we can wind up with folks with some of the same areas of expertise, I think we might want to wrap that together. Questions or comments? I think we're probably ready for some motions on this.
When do we get this back? When do we start? I mean,
Well, I would think
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would think we should probably give the CAO maybe 45 days, considering we're in the middle of the holiday season, 30 days to come back with us. When do you think you can get this done to come back with recommendations for how to structure the commission and the appointments and all the questions that we want to
I think
deal with?
we would shoot for 30 days.
So why don't we try the first meeting in January of the Audits Committee?
it's a winter study.
And
Winters.
Is the intent to move the motion to council today?
No, I think we want this to come back to us and then move it to council after that first meeting. Also, I think we might want to report back on a review of the idea of centralizing collections. When do you think an appropriate time would be to have that back for us?
I think Ms. Mooney from Finance said that within a matter of weeks, because they already have a draft report, but within a matter of weeks, they would be ready to present some information on that issue. So timing-wise, I don't know what the schedule for the committee is during the holiday break, but maybe that first meeting in January would be.
Maybe we bring that back also to the first meeting in January. And let's see, we also wanted to get a report back on items 6 and 7 on where we stand with the loose ends on the fire and police collections. When did they say they thought they could have that back?
They start mid-January. So I would suspect maybe the first meeting, when we have our meeting, we can schedule it.
So let's see if they can have that back for our first audits meeting also. That would all be well timed. Anything else? Other motions, comments?
No.
If not, we are adjourned.
Nope.
No? Oh, I'm sorry. I missed.
Mr. Chair,
I apologize. I forgot less controversial but existent items.
Mr. Chair, just for the record, we're continuing items 1, 6, and 7 for January.
Yes. And I'm sorry. I completely forgot several items. Let's yes. Too into this issue, but let's go with item number 3.
Oh, okay.
Item number 3.
Item 3 and 4 together.
3 and 4. Okay, item number 3 is a City Administrative Officer report relative to the Victim Assistance Program Grants Award. And item number 4 is a CAO report relative to the Special Emphasis Victim Assistance Program.
And if we could have a report from the CAO.
And item number 5 is a CAO report relative to the Joint Powers Verification Unit grant for fiscal year 2009-2010.
And this is for items 3, 4, and 5.
Yes, 3, 4, and 5 all go together. Good afternoon. My name is Ida Rubio with the City Administrative Office. The 3 reports before you discuss the City Attorney's request for authority to accept a total of 3 grant awards. 2 grant awards are from the County of Los Angeles, and the 3rd award is from the California Emergency Management Agency. Each grant stands alone, has its own terms and conditions and funding award and contract goals, yet they all work together to provide the resources needed for the City Attorney's Victim Assistance Program. The Victim Assistance Program grants in the amount of $856,817 is being proposed along with the Special Emphasis Victim Assistance Program, which targets the Korean American community. The amount for that grant is $110,000. The last grant is a Joint Powers Verification Unit program in the amount of $723,693. The grant period for all 3 awards is July 1st, 2009 to June 30th, 2010. My office and the City Attorney's Office have worked together to submit revised budgets for all 3 programs, which now include lower salary costs due to the mandated work furloughs, the newly released cap rates, and city overhead costs, which have not been previously included in the transmittal, which was submitted to you back in July. In doing so, we have utilized the salary savings to increase the reimbursement to the general fund for fringe benefits and or city overhead where it was legally permissible. To my left, I have with me Derek Tennell, who is the program director for the Victim Assistance Program, and he is here today to provide you with a brief overview of the program if you wish. And lastly, I'd like to call to your attention the Special Emphasis Victim Assistance Report, which is item number 4. There will be a addendum report released, which will provide some fiscal changes so that that report, the way it was analyzed, is in alignment with the other two existing reports.
Okay, why don't you give us a brief overview of the program?
Good afternoon. My name is Derek Tonnell. I'm the director of the City Attorney's Victim Assistance Program. The goal of the program is to assist victims and families members to recover from the trauma suffered by their crimes. We have 4 separate grants that fund our program. The first grant is the Victim Witness Assistance Program, or VWAP, or basic grant. That grant funds 10 of our 12 victim advocate positions. The advocate provides direct comprehensive services to crime victims such as crisis intervention, emergency services, court support, and assistance in filing the State of Victims of Crime Compensation Claim, or VOC. The VOC helps to pay for victims' incurred medical losses, income and support losses, medical health counseling, funeral and burial expenses, and our relocation costs. The VOC does not pay for monetary or property loss. The victim advocate helps sexual assault victims, aggravated assault victims, child abuse and elder abuse victims, drunk driving, hit and run, domestic violence victims, and surviving family members of homicide. Advocates are located in several different police divisions across the city: Newton, 77th, Hollenbeck, Wilshire, Olympic, Northeast, North Hollywood, and we have advocates also stationed in San Pedro and Van Nuys in our branch offices for the City Attorney's Office. We also have the Special Emphasis Victim Assistance Program that is designed to help victims in the Korean community, and those advocates work out of the Olympic Police Division. Our third grant is a Joint Powers Verification Unit grant. The verifiers and initiators are responsible for processing and verification of state victim crime compensation applications filed and submitted by the victim advocates in both the CVAP grant and the VWAP grant.
Now, I don't have questions about the individual grants, but just in general, I know that we're adjusting our overhead rate to reflect the true costs. How has that affected the administration of these grants?
Well, in previous reports that have been submitted to council, the overhead cost was not included, so it appeared that the programs were cost neutral. My office recently released a cost allocation plan report to council, and as a result, we will now be reporting all overhead costs, particularly for these programs, which have not been done so in the past. In doing so, it does appear that, the program is a little bit more expensive than it has been in the past, but that's largely due to the overhead cost that's now included. What we have done is, as I stated earlier, is we have tried to the greatest extent possible to reimburse the general fund for the fringe benefits, and also we have done that to the greatest extent possible for general overhead.
Now, to cover the costs without increasing our deficit, is there a way that these overhead costs could be absorbed by the city attorney's budget?
The city attorney's budget, well, this year they were given a budget where they were basically underfunded for all the positions that they have. They will be submitting an operational plan to the greatest extent to cover the salary costs. The overhead cost, I would have to look into that and provide you more detail on that at a later date.
If we could ask for that, that would be helpful.
Okay.
And I know the city doesn't receive a direct allocation for these grants. It goes through the county first.
Yes.
And there's always a question of whether some of that gets siphoned off and we don't really wind up with our fair share. Is there some way logically we should try and address that at the state level? Is it something we should look at trying to get changed legislatively? Has that ever been tried in the past? Do we know?
There was an attempt made back in 1980 to get direct funding from the state for our programs, but that was not successful. I think it's worth looking into it again. I'm working with some of the administrative agencies, Cal EMA, to see if we can get the funding directly from the state to the city to alleviate any kind of issues about delays in that process, and still in the process of working with that to find out if we can make that happen or not.
Well, if that might, maybe we should give direction to possibly include that in the legislative plan for the city, or at least have you look at that and come back with a recommendation of whether that makes sense or not. Any other questions, comments on this?
I had a couple of questions. I was just wondering, just on a mechanical process, is that in reviewing these grants, today we're approving them as grants as opposed to audits of grants. And I was just wondering how they got in this committee, because generally our history has been public safety and budget for these types. And I'm just wondering, is this a workload that you're cleaning up from historical?
Yes, Councilmember John Deering with the CLA's office. I think the city attorney may be able to elaborate further, but I think historically this committee, in its prior existence and as it was defined previously with other committee resolutions, this committee was considered the policy committee for these types of programs operate under the city attorney's office. At this point, this may be the last time that these items are going through audits committee. It was left over from the prior committee structure, as well as the other being able to refer all grants having general fund impact to budget and finance as well.
Let me just ask from the mayor's office, on all three of these are 6 months old. How does that impact us on our rate of recovery and creating a cash flow problem and things that they all started July 1st, but we're now into December, and we only got 6 months in the grant. Do we immediately file our paperwork to get 6 months reimbursement, or how does that work?
As far as the cash flow, the 1020 account, which is the grant salary account, we're fine with that as of right now. We would need these appropriations, though, by January, I would say, to continue to be okay with the cash flow. As far as the reimbursements,
because if it takes us beyond the fiscal year, we're
usually we are lagging in the reimbursements at least by 1 year.
Okay, so that's a routine.
That's a routine thing that we're front funding it this year, but then we'll get the reimbursement next year, which will probably cover, which would actually be a general fund reimbursement.
Okay, and my concern on looking at the three of them, between the three grants, we are into about $250,000 of city money, not the matching money, but city money because of the overhead. I'm wondering, how can we go about reducing these grants to where we're not eating into city general fund money beyond what the grant calls for? Between the three of them, I think one's 140, 150, there's a couple of...
Right, they all have different matching requirements.
Not the matching, we understand the matching.
Right.
But there are other general fund impacts beyond the matching that are at about $250,000 worth on these three grants.
We would have to go back and review that. I'm not
Because
prepared to answer that right now.
You identified on the first one is like 141,000 general fund. That's basically fringe benefits or additional overhead costs. And then I think on number 4 it's like 20-some thousand, 24,000, and then the other one is like 5 is like 70,000. So it's roughly about 75,000. It's roughly about 250,000 above the grant that we're now funding. I'm just wondering, how can we cut back to stay within the grant, borrowing matching funds, but without spending more general fund?
I mean, we could just broaden the direction that we gave to look
the
not only at the city attorney's budget, but other ways that we might be able to fill in that overhead gap.
Yeah, one of the constraints with all of these grants is that there are certain restrictions on what can be reimbursed. Mm-hmm. So fringe benefits can be 100% reimbursed. The overhead, there are some restrictions on that. And for example, for the federal funds, there's a cap on what can be reimbursed for overhead. So we're limited in that respect.
I think what I'm asking is that, do we have the flexibility to reduce, in some instances, the number of people so that you're cutting the overall? Because we're trying desperately in these grants to stay within the confines of the grant,
right,
and not spend more than the matching funds to support the grant. And in this case, I said with these three, they're not necessarily a ton of money, but yet $250,000 the city's going to have to come up with for overhead beyond what the grant is going to fund and beyond what our matching funds are going to fund.
You're correct. You could probably reduce the overhead by reducing staff, and that would be a policy decision.
Because I would like to see what that impact is, because if we don't have to pay $250,000, we don't have to pay the $250,000. What's the impact on the grant as it relates to finding that
Right.
$250,000 within the confines or the organization or the deployment of the departments? Because we know the city attorney is on all three of these, right? I think they're in double digits deficit as we sit here. And so asking them to find within their own budget is unreasonable. So that really means we will be putting $250,000 into their budget between now and June 30th.
Yeah, that would be a policy decision for city attorney's office and council if they would want to reduce the program.
Well, I'd ask by
Staffing
the
of the
time it comes
program.
to council, if we can have that discussion and determine what's the impact if we
Okay.
reduced those three grants over roughly the $250,000. Is there a operational impact? Is it something, one of those grants only 100,000, does it make the grant go away? I'd just like to know that we have looked at every way that we can save that money.
So when you're talking about when you're talking about impacts, you want to know what the operational impacts are and the fiscal impact.
Yeah, the thing is that if you're telling us if you cut $25,000 out of the grant dealing with the Korean community, that it makes the grant go away, that's a different discussion than on the first one, we cut one body out instead of 11, we go to 10, and you save the city $147,000.
Okay.
Those are the kind of discussions that it doesn't make, we may diminish a little bit, but it doesn't make the program go away.
Okay.
I think we actually, ideally, maybe you can bring that information back to this committee.
Okay.
Maybe again at our first meeting in January, along with what we had discussed earlier, which is discussion with the city attorney's office about what they could fill in, if anything, from their budget towards this as well.
So we're going to hold these three grants?
Well, what do you think? What would the impact be if we held the grants, as opposed to letting the grants move forward but coming back with the information?
The fiscal impact?
Well, the practical impact on the grants themselves. Are we gonna screw up the program if we hold it for a month or no?
Sir, may I suggest that we deal with that issue? I believe all three reports are referred to Budget and Finance Committee. They're not?
Not yet.
No, I didn't see any referrals.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just assumed that they all went to your committee, sir.
Or we could not schedule them to the council until you've got those addendums that clarifies the money issue for us, because I'm not willing to vote for something today if I don't know what I'm voting for. Mr. Perks and I have been debating in Budget and Finance for 2 years now the impact of grant funding programs and whether we should continue to do a lot of these based on the cost factors. Some of these, I look at them and say, okay, a couple of these are very low, it's 10% or something like that, the cost factor to the budget, but one of them at almost 50% are very large. So when you get up to those kind of numbers, you start saying, would we do this if we didn't have the grant? And that's the question we've been asking in Budget and Finance. Do we really want to do this, or are we only doing it because there's some money out there? But these days, we got to pitch in money to do it. So is it that important to continue to do? And those are the kind of questions I think we need to ask departments from now on is, would you do this if you didn't have the grant money?
Why don't we bring that back, and rather than bring it back here, because I'm not even sure if this is really an issue that made sense to have in this committee, why don't we refer this to Budget and Finance for the first meeting where you can get this information back to us?
And one other question, I looked at the authorities on these, and half are resolution and half are regular, and I don't understand why any grant-funded positions really are regular authorities.
Yeah, that's a thought too. And one of the reasons that we amended the responsibilities of committees and added in Budget and Finance grants that have a general fund impact is because we were concerned that we'd see policy committees approving things because they like the idea and the concept, but then the financial impact was that sometimes we were upside down on the grant. And so that's why we added that feature, because it gets quite costly. And then particularly, and we won't point out the city attorney, but we will, historically, even when the grant runs out, they then continue it under sub-authorities, which is even more costly. I mean, so that's the kind of thing that we...
Yeah, we did try to rectify that to the greatest extent possible with the 09-10 budget, that we deleted a lot of those resolution authorities where the grant had expired.
Yeah, but that's been a historical issue for us.
But you can't do that if they're regular authorities.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. But the thing is, and for timing, I don't know what it would take for you to get this information, but our last budget meeting is the 7th, and if we can feel certain that we can get the material, we can put it on the agenda for the 7th. If not, then we'll be into January.
Next Monday.
Would it be a verbal discussion, or would you like a written
I think
report?
We need numbers.
Okay.
You know, if you tell us that you can cut it and it doesn't materially affect the operations, if we can find $250,000 we don't have to spend, then we could amend it in the committee report.
I
But
think it would probably be preferable if we can hold it off till January then.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and maybe you can bring back, and it probably should just refer this report back also to Budget and Finance on the practicality of seeking the state change so that we would be funded directly rather than going through the county.
There's been, like I said before, we tried to do that in the past. It did not succeed.
Quite a while ago, it sounds like. And plus, currently, we have a number of council members that are former legislators. Maybe we'd have a little better ability to push as well.
Well, I think the county would be in opposition to that just because, trying to take money out of their pockets to put more in ours, they would fight that,
They have an
tooth and
overhead
nail.
fee too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't you take a look at that and come back to us with a brief report.
Okay.
I would say at Budget and Finance, if you don't mind, refer to that also.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we are adjourned.